Did you know that in 1874, Hawaii exported 24,566,661 pounds of sugar? That's quite a lot of sugar, but this figure makes a lot more sense when you consider that sugar was the Hawaiian Islands' main industry for almost 100 years, and this fact played a great role in the Hawaiian Annexation. In the period following the Civil War, the U.S. was flourishing, and like other world powers, it turned its eyes to expansion, namely the Philippines, Samoa, and Hawaiian Islands. Europeans, specifically the British, first reached the islands in 1778, which were already settled by Polynesians from years prior. The explorer who discovered the islands named the islands the Sandwich Islands, and the name remained for about 70 to 80 years. Missionaries arrived in 1820, and with them white businessmen with dreams of sugar plantations. The first plantation opened in 1835. White settlers in Hawaii changed the politics of the island as well as social and economic life. For example, the landholding system changed. The U.S.'s first foothold in Hawaii was the sugar trade, which was highly profitable to both Hawaii and the U.S., so U.S. policy aimed to keep both European and Asian powers out of Hawaii, and Hawaii flourished. The next logical step was for Hawaii to become part of the U.S., which incited a massive debate over whether or not the U.S. should be an imperial power. Some ideas that played into this was the idea of American exceptionalism, the belief that Americans have a unique mission to spread freedom and democracy. Social Darwinism, which is a belief that conflict between societal groups leads to social progress, as superior groups surpass inferior ones. This belief was used to justify imperialism, racism, and social inequality. Another main idea that was primarily in the 1800s for going coast to coast, but still played a role, was manifest destiny, which stated that the U.S. had a right to conquer the Pacific and keep expanding. Sanford Dole, for example, a lawyer and later representative of the white planters in Hawaii, was an avid believer of manifest destiny and thought that American culture would be best for Hawaii. Other key players in this included Assistant Secretary of the Navy Theodore Roosevelt, who wanted to expand American influence, and President McKinley, who said, "We need Hawaii just as much, and a good deal more than we did California." And then, quote, "It is manifest destiny." Against these ideas were people against imperialism, who argued that the U.S. had its roots in escaping an imperial power, Britain, and was founded on ideals of freedom. A key player in this was the American Anti-Imperialist League, an organization established in 1898 to battle the American annexation of the Philippines and other Pacific territories. One member, Mark Twain, was fervently opposed to it and wrote many essays on the matter and even argued with Teddy Roosevelt about it. Back to Hawaii. After scandals erupted over King David's spending, the King of Hawaii, white settlers forced at gunpoint him to sign a new constitution that essentially stripped him of his power. Sanford Dole helped draft the constitution. In 1891, King David died, and his sister, Liliuokalani, took the throne roughly in conjunction with the McKinley Tariff, which added a tax on imported sugar from Hawaii. Liliuokalani started drafting a new constitution to remove power of the bayonet, and thus in 1893, the white landowners decided something must be done.
On January 16th, 1893, John Stevens, the U.S. diplomatic representative in Hawaii, called upon the U.S. Navy to protect the life and property of American citizens. The Hawaiian palace was surrounded by about 200 American troops. Queen Liliuokalani surrendered, saying, "I yield to the superior force of the United States of America." Sanford Dole was then voted as the head of the provisional government following Queen Liliuokalani's surrender. A petition was then sent out to President Harrison to annex Hawaii by the provisional government. In February 1893, President Harrison signed an annexation treaty with the provisional Hawaiian government, but President Cleveland withdrew the treaty from the Senate and sent John Blount to Hawaii to find out what had happened. Blount had found that John Stevens had used the military without congressional permission to overthrow Queen Liliuokalani and reported it to Cleveland. President Cleveland then sent a diplomat to pressure the provisional government to restore the monarchy. The provisional government refused to restore power, and realizing that Hawaii would never be annexed with Cleveland in power, they decided to move on to a more permanent form of government. In June 1893, a convention of Hawaiian-born Americans and foreign-born residents produced a new constitution for the Republic of Hawaii. The constitution named Sanford Dole as the first president. The goal of the republic was to be annexed by America, which would incidentally remove the sugar tariff. The Constitution was proclaimed by the provisional government on July 4th, 1894, without any ratification vote by the people. In January 1895, a small group of 300 supporters of the Queen attempted to overthrow the government to restore the monarchy. This will be known as the Wilcox Rebellion. They were quickly defeated and captured. About 200 of the supporters were tried for treason, and the Queen was found guilty and restricted to an apartment in the palace. The government eventually freed all the prisoners, including the Queen. President McKinley, a supporter of imperialism, won the 1896 election and worked to sign a new treaty of annexation. Some of the anti-imperialists continued to argue against this. A quote from Grover Cleveland stated, "The mission of our nation is to build up and make a greater country out of what we have, instead of annexing islands." The sugar beet industry and the labor unions were also against the annexation of Hawaii, as they were afraid of the Japanese labor and the Hawaiian sugar industry. In 1897, a petition against annexation with more than half of the Hawaiian natives and mixed bloods convinced Congress to block the treaty, which needed a two-thirds vote in 1898, with only 46 senators willing to vote for annexation. However, the presence of the Spanish-American War brought the topic of annexation back up in July of 1898, and the pro-annexation group submitted a proposal for Hawaii to be annexed by joint resolution, which only needed a simple majority vote. Hawaii was then annexed on July 7th, 1898, due to several reasons, including a potential U.S. Navy base. After the annexation in 1900, the U.S. passed the Organic Act, and the U.S. Constitution was extended to the islands and granted the people territorial citizenship.
Despite being annexed and the natives trying to achieve statehood for representation, Hawaii wasn't granted statehood until 1959. In more recent times, Hawaii has still played a role in sugar, but the industry has mostly died down, as well as it hosting a still active naval base to this day. There are still parties arguing that the annexation was illegal and unjust due to the Hawaiian monarchy being overthrown and the treatment of the natives.